Now settle down, young'uns, and shake the wax out of your ears. I got a story to tell. Now you might recall those three dangerous women I was telling y'all about last time. That ornery quill pusher, Bad News Hannah, who'd made a name for herself, confusticating and discombobulating those no-good lying scoundrels who print what passes for news round here. The girl writes what, that cheroot-smoking, moonshine-guzzling renegade who had a price on her head for aggravating, flustering, and otherwise perturbing the ladies. And Allison, the outlaw who fancied herself a sheriff or some such, who was so out of her mind she thought she was a badger, and who might as well have been one for all the sense she made. It was down at the crossroads over that hill just yonder that their three paths first met, and they knew in the marrow of their bones that they all had business in this here town. You see, they'd been tracking, each unbeknownst to the other, a gang went by the name of the Foyer Gals. A meaner, more deadly nest of rattlesnakes you will never come across. Yet they masked their fell thoughts and deeds behind the veil of the righteous and the false siren song of the just. Who, after all, could possibly argue in favor of the evils of liquor, or the brutish habits of the undomesticated, soused-up men who imbibe, or the continued sufferings of the fairer sex proceeding and precipitating therefrom? But oh, my darlings, our three heroines, they knew those Foyer gals, for all their high-minded jawing and pontificating was up to no good, and they intended to root out that evil and shine the light of truth on it before it might find a foothold in our peaceful, sleepy little town. And what happened next? Oh, we shall see.
Welcome to Honey Badger Radio Classic number 4. No love for the involuntarily celibate, or those who constantly mispronounce things. This is your host, the lunatic, Allison Tiemann, and with me for this installment of HBR Classic and every installment thereafter is Karen Strawn, otherwise known as Girl Writes What, and Hannah Wallen. We've decided to get back to the original format that launched Honey Badger Radio once every 2 weeks, just the three of us. And for the faint of heart, a warning, all three of us are old school brawlers, so expect some shouting, maybe a bit of fisticuffs, but we've all checked our iron at the door, so hopefully no fatalities. Now let's get on with it. When I set out to write the intro to today's show, I struggled quite a bit with trying to figure out what to say about men who find themselves in the position of involuntary celibacy. A couple weeks ago, Karen and I critiqued an article in the New Statesman. The video of that article critique we made live this morning, and that article covered the Red Pill subreddit, but it included some incel involuntary celibate memes. And I remember looking at one while we were going through the article. On one side was a woman bemoaning that her friends hadn't texted her, or that the men who approached her were too ugly. On the other side was a man saying, "I haven't talked to anyone in 2 weeks." That really struck me. I think the term incel doesn't even do justice to the level of social isolation that men often feel. It's difficult being on the outside and looking in. It's difficult to find a way to talk about it that doesn't sound petty or demeaning or condescending. So I promise not to give platitudes or say anything that starts with, "Well, why don't you try?" Instead, I'm going to point out the top 5 hypocritical attitudes towards male incels that I've observed. Starting with number 1. Feminists simultaneously say patriarchy, or men's collective choices to benefit themselves over women, is to blame for men being stigmatized for not being able to find romantic partners, because nothing says male superiority than judging men by whether or not they appeal to women. The whole "a real man can get laid whenever he wants." Yet feminists turn around, and what's the first thing they reach for when they want to shame a man? Virgin, netbeard, loser. And these are the people who build themselves as the ones who are going to fix what they call toxic attitudes towards gender. It's one thing for people who have no interest in making progress towards equality or equity, supporting toxic bullshit like this, but feminists bill themselves as something they are not, and in the process make things worse. It's like going to someone who bills herself as a doctor and having her punch you in the face and steal your kidney, and then tell you, if you question her credentials, you just want people to be sick and you're anti-health. The second hypocrisy is another real irritation. When incels talk about Darwin's theories of evolution, survival of the fittest, and female selection pressure, somehow science becomes a conspiracy theory. Just pointing out the fact that the deer's antlers, the peacock's tails, the lion's mane all exist due to female selection pressure goes from biological fact to some kind of ugly misogyny. Female animals in general, not in all cases, but in general, exert selective pressure on male animals in the mating game. This doesn't become a misogynist conspiracy theory just because incels point out that it applies to human women as well. Number 3, beauty standards. A lot of people assume incels are incels because their standards are too high. But the truth is that women actually judge men's looks more harshly than men judge women's looks. I know, this is a shocker. It's probably we think that men judge women's looks more harshly because basically that's the only criteria left for men to judge a woman. If he judges her morally, he just wants a submissive yes woman to suck his cock and tell him that everything he says is exactly right. An OkCupid study found that women find 80% of men to be below average in looks. In hookup culture, women only have sex with men who are significantly more attractive, and they marry men who are just as attractive. So where is this greater selection pressure on women to be attractive? At least from men's end. If it existed, you would be able to point to its effects, yet there are none. And yet one aspect of female selection pressure that leads to greater rates of male involuntary celibacy, the selection pressure women put on men to be attractive, is instead blamed on men. Men are blamed for boys forcing a beauty ideal on women, yet where is the evidence that they do this? This is another hypocrisy that denies incels their lived experience. 4, the UN recently included access to reproduction opportunities as part of its human rights platform. Does that mean incels are having their human rights violated? If so, what about these feminist and religious conservative campaigns to criminalize the purchase of sex? And speaking of purchasing sexual release, sex toys. Somehow empowering for women, yet men's sex toys are treated as depraved and disgusting and creepy. Number 5, we do everything we can to stigmatize men's sexuality. I don't just mean feminists eroding due process and inventing new terms for how damaging males and male sexuality is faster than they can be written down in a dictionary. Religious notions also stigmatize male sexuality, referring to men's genitalia as the devil rod, and women who have sex with men as impure. We stigmatize men for wanting to touch women, and then we shame them even more for touching themselves. We'd still be engaging in widespread stigmatization of men for touching each other, except gay men created hard power through the gray dollar and forced people to at least superficially accept them. And then we turn around and stigmatize all men touching as innately sexual. In every possible way, we give men the message that their touch is unwanted, undesired, unacceptable. But they're also losers if they do it for themselves. If they can't convince someone to process what society calls as toxic garbage. We isolate men by stigmatizing their touch, and when they get angry, we shame that too. All right, I'm going to step off my podium. I'm afraid that there may be some...
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I know somebody's leaking notifications. But take it away, Karen. Well, I will hunt down the source of the...
Okay, boot anybody in the boardroom who doesn't have their little notification beep boop boops shut off, because this is really, I think, what the problem is. They're hearing a boop when they make a text or something like that. We're not hearing it. We're just hearing an empty space that is unfilled by anything. So, but no, I agree with a lot of what you said. It really is, I think it's become a massive problem of late, in part because of what government has done to erode a man's right or his ability to acquire the type of sexual value that women usually, it's women are born with this currency. Some are born with more than others, but they almost all have currency that's just innate in their sort of reproductive value, their role in that whole thing. And so they have value in the sexual marketplace, and men generally have to acquire that, usually through material success and things like that. And the only other way is to be the physical alpha with the excellent genes. Unfortunately, that's the top 20% of males. That excludes 80% of men. But 80% of men, those 80% had a shot at earning enough sexual market value to be able to bargain on an even playing field with women. Back when monogamy was a thing and pretty much 85 to 90% of the adult population was married, back when we didn't have all of these artificial things in place created by government that actually handicap men in their ability to actually generate that value, right? And then also another set of norms, enforced by the state that actually forcibly take that value from men and hand it to women and essentially remove all of men's bargaining power. So what you see is you see men only really, a large portion of men only really being able to acquire power by being providers, by having material success. And you see the government subsidizing women. You see the government giving them affirmative action in education and employment, squeezing men out of this particular arena. You see the government seizing money from men directly and handing it to women, so that these women don't have to make an equitable bargain in order to have a man support their children and things like that. You see all of these ways that it's undermined over the last maybe 40, 50 years, that the government has stepped in and undermined men's ability to acquire this value, and then stepping in and taking that value from men and giving it to women without any essentially removing men's bargaining power as well. Why would a woman have to bargain with him for a sexual relationship if she can just get that money that he would have provided her through welfare benefits and daycare subsidies and extra funding for training and priority in employment, right? Why would she have to, right? So I think that this is, it's not a new problem in terms of, I think there have always been men who, and maybe even some women who have been involuntarily celibate. But I think that the number for men is growing as they're getting squeezed out of the market by women themselves and by government. And what's really going to happen is we're going to end up with sort of like a chimpanzee-like thing where the top 20% of males dominate the sexual marketplace. They monopolize the entire thing. But instead of like with chimpanzees where, the subordinate chimpanzees, they don't get any sex, but they also don't have to really put a whole lot in to the group or society or give anything to women. They just get to do their own thing and hang out with each other, and they get left alone. No. The government cannot afford to lose their contributions. So it's not going to help them succeed. It's just going to tax them more, right? And then complain about how they're not performing. And so what we really have is kind of the worst of both worlds for those particular men. The worst of the tournament system and the worst of the human sexual marketplace. It's really, and these are guys who, I know guys who are 35 years old, who are virgins, who they have good jobs, they want to have a family, they want to have a wife and kids, and they just are not going to be able to do that. And they know it, right? Because there's there's one flaw that would have been overlooked 50 years ago. They would have found some woman, some homely woman or chubby woman or whatever, who would be willing to settle down with him. And, and now that's just not the case. So.
Yeah. Well, what really gets me on top of this entire situation, there's this narrative of blaming men that sort of gets piled on it as well. So when incels talk about their situation, and they use credible scientific theories to talk about their situation, like the fact that females exert selective pressure on males, they're once again stigmatized for being a misogynist or engaging in conspiracy theories. So it's like a situation where they can't even have their own experience of disenfranchisement. Yeah, Hannah, I've tried to fill in for you because I didn't know if you were able to speak. So if you wish to speak, go right ahead. Because of the issue with you dropping out. So
Okay, no, I'm back. I just didn't know if you were responding to what Karen said or not.
Oh no, feel free to go ahead. Are you up to date?
I think so. I keep losing this. It's only closed on me once, but it's silenced on me a couple of times. So this should be interesting because I've missed some of the conversation, but and I am not caught up on everything that you said. But I wanted to point out a couple of things just based on what I did hear from you and from Karen. I don't know if it's been mentioned or not, but have you ever noticed that the same ideological group that claims there's greater pressure on women to look attractive than there is on men is also the group that does all of their research on sexual violence using definitions that exclude female perpetration against male victims or downgrade it based on the idea or belief that men always want sex and that they'll fuck anything, which would mean that there would be less societal pressure on women to look attractive than there would be on men. Obviously, if it's a big deal when a female person is subjected to unwanted sexual contact, but not a big deal when a male person is subjected to the same type of contact, then it can't very well be that women they face greater pressure to look attractive in order to find a partner. Because how can you be pressured to look attractive if everybody wants you because of your sex? How can you be pressured to look attractive if the sex that you're interested in will fuck anything? Obviously, you could just sit in your chair and eat, whatever you wanted and never exercise and get horribly fat and never do your hair and don't even bathe because you don't really have to. If they'll fuck anything, then, well, you don't have to look attractive. So they can't have it both ways. It's not just hypocrisy on treating one sex's sexuality as predatory and dirty and the other ones as holy and special. There's also, they can't even make up their minds whether there's pressure on women to look attractive in order to get laid or men will fuck anything, because you can't have both. The other one is feminists consistently claim, it's a constant thing. No, feminism is not about hating men. We are not man haters. Stop calling us man haters. We don't hate men. We love men. We care about men. We want to make things better for men. And yet we have all of these things that both Allison and Karen pointed out related to demonizing male sexuality, related to treating men as if anything they do, even to themselves, even in the privacy of their own home, where nobody else can see what they're doing, even if it doesn't involve another living object, even if there is no potential non-consent, somehow it's still an attack on women.
Well, I think it's essentially, that's a case of the wealthy miser begrudging the pauper his halfpenny.
I don't think
right?
it is, because there are feminists out there that claim male use of sex toys, even without the involvement of any women, is a sexually predatory thing, that it's rapey.
Yes,
And
they
that
should not have, that pauper should not even have that halfpenny.
That's exactly it. It's not a matter of calling the men misers denying women their due. It's a matter of
No, it's
using.
it's the wealthy misers are the feminists. The
Oh,
wealthy
I see what
misers
you're
are
saying.
these women, and they are
Well, no,
begrudging
the feminists. I would call the feminists the union.
the
Once again,
cartel.
I'm going to go right back to the union thing that I always do, and I not to demonize unions, although there are some that are more useful than others. I have no use for retail unions after working in retail and dealing with them. But in any case, no, feminists treat sex like women are on strike, and anybody that crosses the line without getting the standards that feminists set is a scab. And anyone who gets sex without feminists' permission, or gets at least sexual satisfaction without feminist permission, is violating the union's rights. Well, guess what? Women don't have the right to deny men sex on their own in their home where there are no women to be violated by it. You don't have the right to decide whether he jacks off to porn that doesn't include you against your will. You don't have the right to tell a guy that he can't look at your ass when you're walking down the street and save that up in his head and jack off to that later on. And if you're offended by that, there is something wrong with you. That's basically it for me.
Yeah, no, agreed. It really is a sort of a female sexual cartel. And the one thing about these cartels is they have this immense power, right, that they want to exert. But part of that is you can't go and buy. It's like the company town with the company house that you have to rent and buy all of your groceries from the company store, because they don't pay you in money, they pay you in vouchers that are only redeemable at the company store. And that's how they keep you disempowered, is making sure that the only way you can get what you need is through them, right? That's how cartels work. And then they can dictate price. They can dictate everything, right? And then on top of that, they do this thing where they've essentially defined sexual violence and sexual harassment and sexual imposition and all of these things so broadly and so murkily, right? So they're so muddy, these definitions, and so open to interpretation on the part of the victim, and actually going and putting in universities this kind of mandate that an episode of sexual harassment is defined as harassment if the victim feels harassed, regardless of what the person did, regardless of the action. And, like when you have a set of rules, a code of conduct, laws, those are there in part to put people on notice as to what behavior is okay and what behavior is not. And that brings into that whole thing, that analogy that one of my commenters used with pancakes. I make delicious pancakes and I really like to watch people eat them. And so I give my pancakes away. I advertise my pancakes are free. Now, usually when I give away pancakes and the people eat them, they give me something in return, flowers or a card or something. They help me move, whatever, they do a favor for me, whatever, right? But the pancakes are advertised as free. And then I want to reserve the right, to, if a given person doesn't give me what I want afterwards, or if I don't like the look of them, right? Or even if I handed him the pancakes and told him to eat them, right? I still want to reserve the right to say, he stole my pancakes, and have him arrested, right? And so essentially what you have is this, that's the way you dominate a population, is by setting out a set of rules that are impossible to navigate and where any action whatsoever could be in violation. And you see this in universities where they have these affirmative consent policies where, the yes means yes policies, where a man has to ask for consent verbally for every time he wants to make a move sexually. Everything from holding hands to kissing to anything like that, he has to ask permission first. But then you also have another policy, the harassment policy, that defines any communication on the part of one person towards another, even if it is not repeated, even if it is perfectly normal, right? If it was unwanted by the person receiving that communication, then that's harassment. So you put men in this double bind where if they follow the affirmative consent policy, they are potentially in violation of the harassment policy. And it all depends on the subjective interpretation and mood and I guess whim of the woman in question in the moment, or a week later, or I don't know, maybe like in a time machine, a year before. Who the fuck knows, right? There's no way for men to comply, right? They're putting these men in an impossible position, and then they shame them for saying they're scared of sexual interaction with women, right? And it just blows me away. Okay, next person.
Hannah, go ahead, say your point.
All right, I wanted to remind the group basically regarding the harassment policy thing, where that comes from. Once again, that is a postmodernist thing. That is the idea that perception is reality, that other people's intentions and motivations, their reasons for doing things, and what they actually did doesn't matter. When you're filing a complaint or a charge, it's your perception that defines it. That comes right out of postmodernist beliefs, where words don't have meaning and your experiences are all subjective, even if they're real measurable things like having your head cut off. This is all, it's all the idea that you can just make shit up as you go along and other people have to accept what you made up. Only the way feminists have done it, it's women's perception that is reality. Men's perception doesn't matter. And that kind of goes right back to what I was saying earlier about the same ideological group claiming that there's greater pressure on women to look attractive, that also says it's not that big of a crime to rape a man because they always want sex and they'll fuck anything. So if women feel greater pressure to look attractive, it doesn't matter if they actually are under greater pressure. The pressure a woman puts on herself can get attributed to men, and feminists think that's all right. And that's part of what we're dealing with here, that is essentially leading to this involuntary celibacy. How do you navigate when you can't deal with the rules, when the rules basically say everything you do is wrong, you don't move? It's like being in check. You can't, any direction that you go, if it doesn't get you out, you can't move. You're screwed. And then all of a sudden, checkmate. Well, that's what feminists are trying to do to men. And it looks to me, just from the series of laws that they've tried to get passed, and the ones that they've succeeded with, and even the ones that they haven't, that the goal seems to be, aside from breaking down due process to make it easier for the state to jail people, it seems to be setting it up so that any woman can marry essentially above her station in the social order. And any woman can get what she wants from any man without having to do any of the appropriate, without having to be a giving person, without having to care about him as a human being, without having to be invested in his welfare, have any kind of relationship with him or anything, that she can just take. And if she doesn't get what she wants by demanding it, then she can get what she wants by making an accusation and putting him through hell and getting it that way. And that's why we're seeing more of a turn towards sort of civil litigation with this college thing, in terms of sexual violence litigation, as opposed to criminal offenses. They're now making them social offenses that you can use against a guy at university. And eventually it'll get to the point where it's going to be settled with money. And that's probably the goal, the long game for this to begin with.
They're actually going for that in Canada, the feminists in Canada, because they're trying to convince the state to set up a completely separate court system, just to deal with sexual assault cases. And there's no, they don't even hide the fact that they're doing this assuming that men are going to be the defendants and women are going to be the complainants. It's just, they don't even try to argue the case in a gender neutral way, and mention male victims or female perpetrators. No, the reason that they want to do this is because women are raped, and it's very hard for women to get justice in the criminal courts when they're raped. And, only 3% of men who rape ever see the inside of a jail cell, which is stupid and completely wrong. But what I think what they're trying to do, and there's been a whole bunch of different suggestions, they want a hybrid of the criminal and the civil courts. So they want all of the victim-friendly or all of the complainant-friendly aspects of the criminal courts and all of the complainant-friendly aspects of the civil courts. So you're talking free access to police investigations, funded by the taxpayer when you make a complaint, free prosecution, free lawyer, but that lawyer would not represent the people or the crown. It would now represent you as a plaintiff, right? Discovery would go both ways, just as it does in civil courts. So not only would the prosecution have to hand over their evidence to the defense would also have to hand over their evidence to the prosecution. Defendant could be compelled to testify, which is not something that happens in criminal cases, but does happen in civil cases. The burden of proof would be a preponderance of the evidence. And there would be a requirement for the defendant to mount an affirmative defense, which actually is proving your innocence, right? If you're you can not mount an affirmative defense in a criminal court if the prosecution doesn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did the crime. You don't even have to say, I didn't do it, other than in your plea, right? You don't have to present any evidence that you didn't do it. But what they want is to put a burden on the defendant to actually provide enough evidence that they didn't do it in order for it to shift this balance of probabilities. And then on top of that, it would come with the potential for jail time, but also the potential for large cash prizes for the plaintiffs, right? And so it's just, I'm absolutely flabbergasted. And they're doing this on the basis, right, that 70% of sexual assaults in Canada go unreported, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, but like the legal expert in the panel discussion between Christy Blatchford and I forget the legal expert, and then David Butt, who's one of the lawyers who's trying to push for this. Like this one legal expert said, there's a reason for that. It's the same reason you wouldn't schlep yourself down to the police station to report that your garden hose went missing from your yard. It's not worth it to you. It was a trivial offense, right? And are we really going to completely redesign the justice system for something like the 35% of sexual assaults that don't get reported, that might have been serious, and and are often not reported, not because they think the system won't help them, but because they just want to get on with their lives, or they just don't want their family to know this happened to them, or whatever. All kinds of other reasons, right, that don't amount to, I don't think I'd be able to get justice. And it's just absolutely appalling to me that they would be even considering something like this. And but that's what they're considering in Canada, and that's, yeah, I'm just, yeah.
To add to Karen's point, I want to remind people that the pinned post in the men's rights subreddit right now, HB 51 has passed the House in Georgia. It needs the status needs tracked, and it needs to be sort of talked about with representatives, with senators it's still got problems. There's still a fight against it. There's still an actual huge push against it. And this is like one of the reasons that we're seeing an uptick in involuntary celibacy has to do with this campus rape issue, where we have a situation where on campuses, all you have to do is walk past the wrong woman and she feels like you looked at her wrong, and you can get accused of harassment. And here in Ohio, there was a guy who was raped by a girl and then reported for sexual assault at Amherst, I believe. And that one, there was another one. I don't know where the other one was, but both of those would be addressed. Those types of things would be addressed in Georgia by this bill. This is a due process bill. It's the one that requires reporting to police rather than simply dealing with it on campus, and using certified police to investigate rather than having the interdisciplinary studies professor run the hearing. So this would create a situation where there would be fewer feasible false accusations. One of the biggest problems that is causing involuntary celibacy right now is campus feminists convincing all of the girls on campus that all a guy has to do is say hello and he has sexually assaulted her. So this needs to be turned back. So take a look. Like I said, the pinned thread in Reddit's men's rights subreddit. Read what Victor Zen posted in there, and see what you can do to help this effort out. Because if we can get it passed in one state, and it'll start working in that one state, just having it in place sets a precedent that we can use to encourage other state legislatures to do similar changes in legislation and bring due process back to our campuses.
What's the name of the bill?
Actually, it's not stated in the thread, so I would actually have to go through. It's HB 51, and there's a lot of links in the post. So if you want to go check it out and click on the links in the post, you can find out. Here we go at the bottom. It says current version of the bill. So I'll click on that, and it says
it's
nothing about the name of the bill.
It's a bill to essentially oppose the Dear Colleague letter.
Essentially, yeah. It what the Dear Colleague letter did that was bad. There's a couple of things. First of all, it took these cases out of the court system. Second of all, it changed standards for not just for proof, but for what constitutes harassment. And then third, it changed the proof standards. The thing that makes it relevant to this discussion, though, is the change in standards for what constitutes harassment. And this is something that's been consistent throughout feminism's approach to harassment. It's harassment when a guy does it to a gal, but they don't think it's harassment when a gal does it to a guy.
It's harassment if she feels harassed.
Yeah, it's harassment if she has a feeling, even if you didn't do anything. That's one of the big problems that's leading to this situation where, like, guys can't approach. How can they approach if everything they do, even if they didn't do anything, can be considered harassment?
Well, even without these rules, too, right? And these really punitive measures that can be brought to bear against men who put their foot wrong. You still have, and I'm going to mention again, like I have in the past, Scott Aronson and his infamous comment 178 or something like that. And you can Google that and go read it. But he describes as a shy, awkward, nerdy guy, right, going through university. He said the sort of the sexual assault / consent classes, the seminars that they were subjected to at orientation every year in the first week, that was enough to fill him full of enough self-loathing and terror to last the entire year, that he felt, and it wasn't that he was necessarily scared that there was going to be some kind of official punishment coming down on his head if he put his foot wrong with the woman. But he felt he had internalized these messages to such a degree that he felt that him even being attracted to a woman was a violation of that woman. And of course he couldn't help it as a young man in his late teens, early 20s, right? Could not help being attracted to women. So he essentially thought, if he's looking at a girl and she even senses that he's attracted to her, what kind of social condemnation is going to come down on him, and he will deserve it because he has no right to be sexualizing a woman. That's objectification. That's objectification.
If that guy doesn't approach girls because of that, is that voluntary? After that's been put on him, how is that voluntary?
No, it's absolutely not. And on top of that, he was so mind fucked, right? Just by the whole sexualization, objectification, predatory male sexuality narrative, even absent the rules, like a hard and fast set of rules or a very punitive set of rules. Even without that, even with just the social pressure and the sort of the indoctrination at the start of every year about how bad he was for lusting after pretty young women, right? That he actually went to his doctor and asked for supplements that would chemically castrate him, that would kill his libido entirely, because he was terrified of himself, right? He was terrified of himself because all of these feelings that he's having that are normal, natural feelings that men have toward women, right? Especially when they're young, right? Those were all horrible, predatory, nasty, evil, disgusting, violative feelings that dehumanize women, right? And so he had this massive complex by the end of school, about sex and sexuality and women and himself. And I mean, when I read that comment, and then he got so much flack from feminists, right? They just freaking ripped him up to shreds about this, because how dare you make women feel at fault for your personal issues, right? And all of this, how dare you put that on feminists, right? We didn't do this to you. And I was just blown away by the entire thing. But I mean, this is a really nasty freaking problem, because there are a lot of guys who kind of do feel vaguely sickened, I think, by their own attraction to women. And then if you feel that way, if you feel like hitting on a woman is a creepy thing to do, right, you're going to come off, you're going to project that in your expressions and in your way of going about it, and you're going to come off as a creep.
Real quick, you just described a Darvo attack. What feminists did, Darvo attack.
Oh,
and
of course.
Anybody that doesn't know what that is, look up A Shrink for Men and read her description of the Darvo attack.
Yeah, it's essentially when a woman is like slapping the shit out of you and you dare to say, I wish you would stop slapping the shit out of me, right? Because that's abusive. Then she comes back and says, oh, how could you say I'm abusive? I feel so hurt. How could you do that?
I'm just going to add to that, to what you guys are saying. The reason why I was struggling with this, because I don't know if I can talk about how people can live with this, or men can live with this situation, or take positive steps to stop being incel. But what I can talk about is the sheer amount of hypocrisy and shaming that goes into that men who find themselves in this situation, they can't even talk about it, because somehow that offends feminists, and it's usually feminists that are getting offended. To be quite honest, if you don't like that, if you're a feminist listening to that, don't stop taking offense at the fact that we're pointing out that you're taking offense. Okay. Well, so what I conceived of when I thought about what the show should be about would be about the sort of the meta of this situation. Because not only do men who are involuntarily celibate have to deal with the fact that they don't get touch and we're a social species and this is something that they need, they also have to deal with the fact that if they talk about it, they're blamed and shamed for having talked about this situation or having said
and demonized. How dare, like, how disgustingly greedy are you, right, to complain about not getting, you know, something as trivial as sex, says the person who can essentially just show up at the bar and you know, pick 4 guys and with very little effort go home with one of them.
And I was looking at some of the stuff, even like continuing to shame men who find themselves in an involuntary celibate position, saying things like, well, maybe the problem isn't with the other 7 billion people on the planet. Maybe the problem's with you. Well, here's the thing. We do handicap young men when it comes to finding a romantic partner, even beyond the average, what you might find on the savannah. I mean, what it would take to attract a Neanderthal woman on the savannah is an order of magnitude, I think, less elaborate, difficult, fraught, emotionally wrenching than what it takes to attract a woman today. So if we're just talking about biology, I think we're dealing with something that's a little bit more hysterical and ridiculous right now. But not only are they expected to deal with being the sex that is selected for, so they have to deal with the sex that has selection pressure put on them. They also have to deal with this idea, this entire social attitude that puts even more stigma on them. And then they have to deal with, on top of that, like the whole stigma that you were talking about, Karen, this idea that their desires are filthy and that their sexuality is some kind of toxic waste that they have to bribe women into processing. Like, I don't know, penises or semen as carbon tax or some shit. And they have that. And then on top of that, they get shamed for having this handicap and not being able to overcome it. So society puts this handicap on it. With every single She Fears You campaign, they put a handicap on men having this ability to regard their sexuality as a positive thing, as a gift, as something that's a shared intimacy and a good thing. So they can't approach a woman with this feeling that what they're approaching them with, the proposal they're approaching them with, is a positive thing. It's a good thing. They have to approach them with this sense of shame. But simultaneously with that, they're shamed if they ever say, well, hey, look at this handicap that you're giving me to do this thing. This sucks. Then they have people saying, well, maybe the problem isn't the 7 billion people putting the handicap on you.
Well, and then on top of that, you have them giving bad advice. I mean, like what Karen brought up earlier, feminists and you brought up the same thing. Feminists tell men they're dirty and shameful and everything they do naturally as part of the normal course of flirting and connecting with others. The way that our society has evolved to do over the course of centuries, suddenly now that's wrong and bad, and men who do it are rapacious and predatory and evil and everything. And then they turn around and they give them this set of advice. This is how you get laid. We want you to act like this. And, insert description of feminist men here.
It's bullshit.
This creates an entire category of incels because you cannot get laid doing what feminists tell you is going to get you laid. They tell you to do the dishes. Doing the dishes is not sexy. It's very nice, but it's not sexy. Being yourself, being the person who has masculine interests and a masculine appearance, even if by the standards of other men you're effeminate, you're still more masculine than most women. It's very rare to run into a guy, even a guy that's considered effeminate, who doesn't have masculine qualities. Those things that feminists tell you are terrible and you should get rid of them. don't get rid of them. Be yourself. And for the guys who are more rugged, be yourself. Don't let feminists tell you that that's wrong. If a woman starts acting like there's something wrong with you for being that way, then you're around the wrong woman. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that you picked the wrong woman to hit on.
Well, what I want to add too is that when you've convinced men that their sexuality, what they're asking these women to accept when they approach a woman, is it's essentially toxic waste. It's harmful. It's depraved. It's nasty. It's gross. And she's doing you a super mondo favor by maybe even just considering bestowing, her sexuality on you and accepting your toxic waste. What ends up happening is these guys get so underconfident when they're approaching, right? And they think, well, there's no way she could possibly even say yes. And so when they go to approach a woman, they are lacking confidence. And what generally, and pickup artists have this absolutely 100% right, is what women are attracted to in a man is generally a sense of confidence in himself, right? So you're taking this group of men, probably the ones most susceptible to the message are the ones who maybe are like, they're not that good looking, right? They maybe were picked on in school or whatever. Those are going to be the most susceptible to internalizing negative messages about themselves. And you're telling them things that will completely erode their confidence when they approach women. And so you're essentially programming them to do the exact opposite of what they should do when they approach women, which is project confidence.
What feminists are basically doing, and it is feminists. It's not women. I know we've had in the chat saying, it's women. It's not feminists. Women know they want men who are men. Women who are interested in men want men who are men. And that's not to say there has to be some cookie cutter, you got to be a lumberjack, blah, blah, blah. No, but we don't want men who are trying to pretend to be something else. Feminists are telling men that women want other women with dicks. We don't. If we want women who are women. If we want men, we want men. We don't want other women with dicks. So you don't have to imitate women to get laid.
I just wanted to address that. I mean, I don't know if it's I would say that there is an element of biology in this, so that women will probably always be, to some degree, exert selective pressure on men, maybe less than what we're thinking in our society. But I don't think feminism helps this situation. And to be honest, we can point to specific legal problems that feminism is creating. Once we get rid of those and get rid of a lot of the toxic narrative that feminism has created, then we can deal with how much of it is biology and how much of it is women.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do want to address some of the things that came up in that you posted in the chat here. A couple of studies that show only 40% of men reproduce compared to 80% of women. I think that's
from Sly 9.
Yeah. I think that's historically, and they do that through mitochondrial DNA and stuff like that, trying to figure out those kinds of things and other genetic markers to essentially predict backwards how many men through history would have reproduced versus how many women. And I think that those numbers are a little tricky because there have been a few episodes of bottlenecks within the male population where there were mass die-offs of men for whatever reason, probably war or something like that, that sort of impacted those results. But I would say that generally women have a much higher likelihood of being able to pass on their genes even now than, or even 100 years ago or 200 years ago than men do. So
I can speak to this as well, because I've looked specifically at some of the studies that this is based on. And the science is really new and it's changing a lot. So it's hard to make some hard and fast conclusions on it, but there are some interesting things. First of all, the science that the 80% versus 40% is based on has been since updated, and what it's based on is the last common ancestor for both men and women, and what the most current science on that particular statistic actually has narrowed the gap between the last common ancestor for both men and women. And at this point, the gap might be explained by the fact that women's generations tend to be shorter than men's. And what that means is that women have their first child younger than men. But there is another piece of genetic anthropology, I guess you would call it, that did find that there's a really, like, as Karen was mentioning, a really, really stark bottleneck about 100,000 years ago, where it looks like it's possible that about 17 women for every one man bred. But what's interesting about that is the people who are looking at this science mentioned that this is unnatural. This has to be something cultural. It might have there is a possibility that it was a die-off of men, but they're pretty sure that they were around doing something. They just weren't breeding. And what that could be is, and what it actually resembles is a domestication event, because the other bottlenecks, other genetic bottlenecks like that, happen when we severely restrict the breeding of animals we're trying to domesticate. So what ends up happening is we have one bull, one stallion, and we breed that bull, that stallion, to a whole bunch of females in order to control the breed. So that might be an explanation for that particular event. In the current era, the difference between how many men versus how many women reproduce seems to be much closer to 1-to-1. So and like I said, the science is pretty much all over the place. It's hard to really make a definitive conclusion about it since it's so young, the science. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and I wanted to also mention too that like when you're dealing with these things, when you say 1-to-1, that's, I passed on my genes. Now, a woman might have had 4 kids, and a given man might have only had 1, and another man might have had 30 or 35, kind of on the sly, right? And or even more, right? So it's really difficult to say. I think that women generally have, the average woman has she passes on more copies of her genes than the average man. Just sort of in general, on average, I think that's probably something that we can, especially since polygamy still exists in certain societies in the world these days. I do want to say, okay, has this female hypergamy on steroids made it to where women are more likely to aim for men beyond their pay grade, even more so than usual? Yes. And the reason why is because as women become more independent and self-sufficient, their hypergamy increases. It does not decrease. The prediction from feminists was always that when women become independent, then they will not have to choose partners upon which they can be dependent, right? They would be able to marry down. And it was sort of this excuse that, well, because women are curtailed in society from being economically independent, of course they have to marry men for money and all of this. But once we make it so that women can be self-supporting and self-sufficient and economically independent, they won't have to anymore, and therefore they won't. And what's actually been shown is that women's propensity to demand more money from men actually increases as their socioeconomic status increases, right? So working class women are much more likely to marry somebody who earns just the same as they do, or even maybe a little bit less. They're much more likely to do that than a woman who's very successful. She's maybe a high-powered attorney, or she's an investment banker or something like that, earns $1 million a year. right? She's not settling for somebody who earns less than $1.3 million, right? Because that her hypergamy has actually increased. It has more room to express, I think, now that she doesn't have to depend on, because when you're struggling to feed a family on $20,000, if a partner who's earning a steady $15,000 a year, right? That's almost doubling your income. That's an incredible increase in your quality of life right there, even if he's earning less than you. And because the jump from sort of that abject poverty or the really struggling to the not struggling so much anymore doesn't depend on, him earning scads and scads more than you, right? You're more willing to actually look at that guy in your socioeconomic range, earns about the same, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, whatever, and marry that guy. But when you get up into those upper brackets and you can afford to be more and more and more and more and more choosy about who you partner with, the hypergamy actually increases. And in particular, because women do not want to support men. In general, women absolutely do not want to economically support men. So,
and I wanted to just talk a little bit more to Legend MGTOW saying it's feminism, it's women. Well, the question is, how much of this is biology? Like when we scrape ourselves down back to the Neanderthal, how much hypergamy was the Neanderthal female expressing towards the Neanderthal male? And what were our behaviors towards each other in a purely biological situation? Because we're dealing with a lot of social changes between then and now. And if you want to talk about purely biology, purely the woman, then we have to go way back there, and I think that's a discussion for another day. So staying free, MGTOW, do you think incel is the answer to the gender war? I think for the most part, involuntary celibacy is, I believe that the people who are the men who find themselves in that situation consider it involuntary. So I don't know if embracing something that's involuntary is illogical. But I think the answer to the gender war, I don't have time right now to explain my answer to the gender war. It's too elaborate, and Karen says that potentially she thinks I'm insane. So
yeah, she's complete. She's a moon out of lunatic
when it comes to my solution, but
what I think actually is MGTOW, right? And this is, I don't think involuntary celibacy is it. All of that is you have been removed, right? You have been removed from consideration, right? What we actually need is MGTOW in the sense of men who are removing themselves. I think that applies pressure on the system. Men who are removing themselves, men who women would want, who are removing themselves from, whether it's from marriage or from relationships or from whatever, or I'm going to have my relationships with women, but I call the shots, and there's no cohabitation, there's no this, there's no that. I think that is probably the one thing that's going to, because that's a choice. That's a man who is exercising power to make a choice. Involuntary celibacy is kind of this, it can be so easily just brushed off as a bunch of losers, and we just wash our hands of them. And who would want to bring them back in anyway, right? We rejected them for a reason. And so I think that incel's not an answer, or is not any kind of, it's not going to help in the gender war, but MGTOW has a chance of actually making a difference. So
incel is the increase. I mean, it's always existed, but the increase in it among men is largely a result of the gender war. And I would say I keep bringing this back to feminism, but I'm going to point this out. Anytime you create an environment in which one group's corruption does not lead to any kind of consequences that they personally have to face. And other groups have to face not only the consequences for that group's corruption, but for any semblance of corruption of their own. You're going to increase the corruption of the group that gets away with everything. And that's what's happened with women because of feminism. We've got a situation where during the past 100 to 150 years, maybe 200 years, feminists have fought tooth and nail to take like the social circumstances that both sexes faced, whether they were the circumstances that both sexes faced the same thing directly, or what men faced was dependent on what women faced, and what women faced was dependent on what men faced. Like, men had responsibilities toward women that in order for them to be able to fulfill those responsibilities, women had to deal with restrictions that prevented them from getting in men's way of fulfilling those responsibilities. Like, feminists spent the last 100 to 200 years alleviating all of the restrictions and consequences and so on that women faced, while striving to maintain the requirements, the obligations for women that men faced, and the consequences that men faced for failing to meet those obligations, or for any time anything bad happened to a woman around them. And because of that, they've created this situation where women have become increasingly, as a group, have become increasingly corrupt, to the point where it does seem like part of female nature. But if you take any group of human beings, or any other living thing for that matter, and you set out, cushion one segment of that group from its own corruption, and let it befall the entire rest of the group, this is what you're going to get. So it doesn't make it part of female nature. It makes it part of the nature of all living things. And it's human nature in particular, because we are thinking, self-aware, driven creatures that want to improve our situation, and we imagine ways to do it, and then we set out to make those things come true. And it's, as much as I have sympathy for men going their own way, as much as I see it as a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation, that's one of the things that's somewhat common among red pillars and men going their own way, that belief that this is part of female nature and it can't be fixed. That's not productive. Because if it can't be fixed, then we're stuck in this situation forever. And you can't escape it, because feminists are slowly orchestrating in the legislative process a means by which you can be trapped regardless of your behavior. No matter how far your own way you go, you are still subject to the whims of these corrupt women. So it has to be reversible, or we're fucked.
Well, we may well be fucked. I do think that there is value in understanding that some of this is biological in nature, and that in that sense it does tend to apply not just to feminists but to women. I mean,
yeah, but like, you're replying to a statement of whether it's all biological nature.
Yeah, no,
some of it is, and I didn't say some of it wasn't.
No.
But that it isn't all biological. It isn't a matter of female nature.
Well, okay, here's the thing, though, right? Because it is also in our biology to respond in different ways to different environments and to different sets of circumstances. So, I mean, we know that when girls grow up without their dad in their home, they achieve menarche earlier. They're more likely to have sex at earlier ages. They're more likely to become pregnant in their teens, and all of those things, right? And we believe that that is, at least in part, a biologically programmed response to a set of circumstances, right? The set of circumstance, and the theory or the hypothesis behind that is that if dad's not around, it's probably because there's some kind of something bad going on in the overall general environment, right? So there's a war going on, or there's a famine going on, or there's something going on like that. And so this girl's biology will actually kick in and essentially do everything in its power to compel her to find a male to partner with in order to have a male protector in the absence of her father, right? So this is what they think that this is all about, right? That's a biological response, right? And we can temper that biological response by doing everything that we can to ensure that girls have their fathers in their lives, whether they're living with them or whether they have 50-50 custody, all of those things, right? Which will essentially, the circumstances will induce a different set of biological imperatives. And this is really why I think dismantling the system the way we have, I mean, we've really done an unprecedented amount of tinkering with how we do things over the last 200 years or so, in terms of law, in terms of social norms, in terms of what is permissible, what's considered okay, what's considered not okay, and all of those things, right? And we have no idea how we would be biologically programmed to respond to this new set of incentives and disincentives. I think that absolutely there is a biologically programmed response in women called hypergamy that increases the more economically independent women get, right? I think that that is a biological response to the changing status of women. Now, is there something that we can do to change that from outside, change the set of circumstances in which women are operating to change that response? But I don't think that we're going to be able to actually change the response itself without changing the overarching set of circumstances in which women are operating, right? So this is why it's just been like the dismantling of all of these norms. You know, we've thrown all of these things out. They're outdated. You know, marriage is just out of date. It's the only reason people got married is because it said God would like you if you get married to have sex, and if you don't get married and have sex, then you're going to hell. And that's the only reason we had marriage. No, the reason we had marriage was because it was functional, and it provided a very obviously a very beneficial function to all societies, because every single society that has achieved the status of a civilization has not only had marriage, but has had its primary form of marriage being monogamous. Like even in places where there's polygamy, most couplings, most pairings are actually pairings, right?
Well, didn't marriage, though, I mean, it pretty much started out as a business arrangement. It wasn't a romantic thing. It wasn't people choosing their partner. It wasn't. You got married because your father or the tribal leaders or whatever group decided that some other family, they wanted to have a legal connection to some other family or some other tribe or some other kingdom or whatever. And
Yes.
that was where marriage came from. It didn't have anything to do with the way we live it today at all.
No, it didn't. And it probably worked for a lot of different things, like dealing with feuds and dealing with conflicts between families and keeping the peace and consolidating power and expanding communities and getting us to the point where we're so intermarried and all of that it just we've managed through this way of doing things to live in communities of more than 150 individuals, which is the best chimpanzees can do.
And
right?
think about this, though. So marriage started out as this business arrangement. The choosing of the husband wasn't based on women's perception of the husband as being above them or financially stable or any such thing. And it wasn't necessarily always about how the wife was going to be provided for. It was whether the business deal was going to be beneficial for the guy's family and beneficial for the gal's family.
True,
so
but
it was a situation where both sides were shopping around.
Yes, but
when the thing that changed it was when we got into this romantic love situation, this chivalry situation, and because women are treated like they're weaker, and in physical ways we are, then all of a sudden it became the guy's burden to seduce, the guy's burden to court and woo, and the woman had to make herself interesting enough to be courted by a guy who was going to provide for her. And where guys could land on their feet because they're going to go out and earn their living and so on, women who didn't want to do that, who didn't want to try to live in that world, their only other option was to, look for a guy that was going to support them. So once again, this seems to me that it was as much molded as anything else. I don't know that this is necessarily created by biology. Biology might have been influenced by it.
Yes.
We might have gotten to a situation today where women are doing this, but we can't be sure of that because it's such a tradition and it's been so trained. Like, girls are taught this when they're little girls. Girls are taught to vet guys for character. They're taught to date up.
Yeah.
This is something that gets trained into 5-year-olds. Hell, Barbie, the toy, the Barbie toy. The whole joke about the bitch having everything.
Yeah.
That's portrayed. It's a way of training little girls. This is what you should be looking for. So how can we be sure it's biology?
Oh,
When there are so many signals all around every little girl, when the adults in her life are telling her this, when the toys she plays with are telling her this, when everything she sees on television is telling her this, and if she's in the poor end and living without her father, then her mother is relying on Uncle Sam, who is treated as a masculine influence, daddy government, Uncle Sam. You don't ever hear the U.S. government, or any other government for that matter, referred to as motherly. So we're in a situation where girls have every message coming into their lives: depend on men, depend on men, depend on men. If he's not dependable, he's not worth your time. This is
Don't want no scrub.
It makes it really hard to look at this and say biology.
I'd have to agree with Hannah, and I'm also going to pull this back on topic.
Okay.
Forcibly, if necessary.
All right, whatever.
Forcibly, if necessary. But I sort of agree with Hannah. What nature? How do we extract nature versus biology in all of this?
You can't.
You can't. And
there's room to say it could be, but there's not proof that it is.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that even if it is biology, we have a craving for fat and sugar and salt. It's totally biological to have that craving. But if we spend all of our time just indulging that craving, it's not healthy. So it might be that these roles are, very deeply rooted in biology. Doesn't mean that it's healthy for either men or women, or something that we should pursue as a society, or as a goal. This
is really what I think, but it will actually require social engineers, I guess, or the people who are making the laws, the people who are
or just a better sale. Like, no, well, the media need to be social engineers. Just convince people.
The media, everybody who's actually informing the public, right, needs to actually get behind the idea that single motherhood is not heroism. Right? It's actually fucking your kids over if you choose that without good reason, right? And just because you're not satisfied, like, with your husband, like, he doesn't make you happy, right? You're going to divorce him. Like, we need to actually have women understand, and I don't think many do until maybe some of them realize it partway through the process, right? But I don't think most women who choose to divorce understand that they're not just ending a marriage. They are completely disintegrating their family, and they will have to find some other way to patch that family into something resembling functionality in order for it to be a good thing for their kids. I don't think most women realize this. I don't think most women even really necessarily consider the impact on their children.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but to pull this back on topic, got to stay on topic,
Then once again, I think that actually is on topic, because that's a situation that basically takes the man out of the equation, which means that he's by himself again.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think
it reduces what men have to bring into the equation. Like Karen was talking about this earlier. It doesn't give men access to the things that make them valuable mates. But the other thing is that all of this is all existing in a society where we have something fundamentally different, just even on a linguistic level. And I've mentioned this before. We don't have a linguistic category for adult human male. Man is not a linguistic category for it's still gender neutral. It's still used as gender neutral until we stop using it as gender neutral. It still is gender neutral. So at some point we lost the idea of celebrating the very idea of men, of adult human males, as having a benefit and a value in and of themselves. And if we did celebrate that, if we did give them their own linguistic category and say, hey, we value you enough to give you your own word and your own identity, I think that we would solve a lot of the problems with women valuing men. Because I don't know if it's hypergamy so much as this idea that men differentiate themselves from women by serving women and becoming, rising up in this hierarchy. But if we actually recognize that men have a value by virtue of their biology, if we got that word back, and we exist in a society where that word doesn't exist, we got that word back, and we said, yes, you have a person who has an adult male level of testosterone has a value just by existing. We don't need hypergamy, because you get a man, you get something valuable. A woman gets something valuable. They get something that's acknowledged to have social value. They get a person that's acknowledged to have social value by virtue of their biological existence. They get somebody with an identity that's separate from service from women. And I think that would really help with this whole situation, because not only does it give men an innate value, or wears an innate value. I know I'm throwing it back to archaic English, but whatever. It gives them an innate value, and it has a recognition that they have an innate identity separate from women. You don't need to go for the lumberjack it's an acknowledgement that the hairdresser, if he's a man, is more masculine than the woman. The most effeminate man is more masculine than a woman in the context of a society that recognizes male as its own identity. And so you don't have to have these hierarchies of men competing for each other, or hypergamy, because you get a man. You see what I'm saying?
It kind of goes back to a little bit to what I have talked about before with respect to what we teach kids about valuing themselves. And we have this really screwed up sort of imbalance between what we teach little boys versus what we teach little girls, where we teach little boys only that they have to make their way in the world, which everybody should have to make their way in the world to a degree. It's not wrong to teach people to have a career, to seek having a career. It's not wrong to teach people to be the best that they can be. But it is wrong to teach people that they have no value at all if they don't create a value for themselves as a person. We don't teach girls that. We teach girls that they automatically have a value, and that the way other people are valuing them is based on how the girl is perceived. And we give them this screwed up set of signals with this the idea that their value is based on other people's perception of them, and yet they are owed that perception because they are girls. And it really screws up both sexes, because you get guys who end up, if their career path doesn't go the way they originally planned, or if they get divorced, or if their circumstances change dramatically and they don't land on their feet, who end up committing suicide, basically, under those circumstances where a woman might not. And I think this is part of the reason why we have an increase in male suicide versus female suicide. But at the same time, we have this situation where women believe, because of this training that we're doing to children, this wrongful training that we're doing to children, women believe that their happiness has to come from outside themselves, that everything that they feel and experience is inflicted from the outside or given from the outside, that they don't, you don't make yourself happy, your partner makes you happy, your family makes you happy, your job makes you happy. And so they end up rejecting or abandoning men who don't pander to that, or who, if they set an impossible standard, can't live up to that standard, or just for having their own personalities, just for having their own goals in life and their own wants and needs and their own emotional background and so on. And that ends up putting a lot of men by themselves, a lot of men in a situation where they don't have anybody, because the women in their lives are treating them like they're responsible for those women's experiences when they're not. And when we teach, if we can teach girls, if we can bring girls to a point where they learn to make their own happiness, their own experiences, their own lives, and to enhance their own value by having that career, by being the best person they can be, by growing the way men are expected to grow. And we can teach men and boys that women's lives, women's experiences, women's emotional tapestry is not their job. And they can be independent. They are valued as people, and they can still seek to enhance that value. If we can get to the point where that's what we are teaching our children, so that they both learn those same lessons, you make yourself happy, you find a partner that you have enough in common with, that you can work together well, and you invest yourself in each other's welfare and your own, and you make a home and you grow that way. If we can go back to teaching kids that, then we will significantly reduce the incidence of either sex being involuntarily celibate.
And I just wanted to add to that. I think that if we actually get back to that place before we lost that word, where before we decided for whatever reason that men didn't deserve, adult human males didn't deserve linguistic recognition for their value, we could get back to that. I think that would help for men who are in a position of involuntary celibacy, because here's, and this is, I apologize if this is any way insulting, or this is not intended that way. How much of what is going on in this situation is men seeking approval versus companionship, men seeking a positive identity versus having somebody to share their life with? And if you take away that compulsion to try to seek a positive identity, to try to find a woman to serve, to try to find a woman to make happy, so that you feel complete as a person, or you feel like you have a positive identity, if you take that away, how much of the pressure and the pain of the situation goes away? So I wonder, when we had that word, when we had that recognition, that linguistic recognition of the value of adult human men, how many men were just okay with not having a woman in their life? They were just, they did their thing, and that was that, and they didn't need to go out and strive for it, because they were looking for that approval or that positive sense of identity. Go ahead, Karen.
I think actually, you've got something there in terms of, like there was this beautiful scene in the movie Seven Mules for Sister Sarah, where Sister Sarah was asking Clint Eastwood, what's her freaking name, the redhead. Anyhow, she was asking Clint Eastwood, have you ever been married? And he's like, nope, why not? Didn't much care to, why not? Seemed a lot of bother, something like that. Right? I can do my own thing. I can blah, blah, blah. Right? And I think that one of the other insidious things that has happened over the past 100 years or so, but accelerating since the 1960s, is this kind of it's a combination of disgust and suspicion surrounding men being together, right? Like just men hanging out, male only spaces, male only clubs, male only whatever. And I still remember that episode of the Flintstones where Wilma and Betty sneak in, they disguise themselves as men and sneak into the water buffalo lodge, and they end up having to go through an initiation that involves paddling on their backsides and all of these things, right? Because they were so suspicious as to what the men were getting up to in this water buffalo lodge. And then they found themselves, after going through this initiation, to be like completely bored by the whole thing. And it was just nothing special. It's all it is just a bunch of men hanging out, being men, right? And I thought that was looking back on it through, after being involved in this, I thought that was a beautiful episode. But what gets me is that a lot of these men who are incel, a lot of these men who are maybe just don't want a relationship with a woman or whatever, they would get a huge amount of benefit from that kind of bachelor gangs that you see on the Serengeti, among the lions and elephants and other types of animals, that where when you actually when you remove those males from the group, right? And these are males who are actually incel, gorillas too, things like that, who've been expelled from the group. They are not wanted. They've reached adulthood. Get the fuck out, right? Because the alpha male doesn't want any rivals, blah, blah, blah. So these are the rejects. These are the beta males. These are the ones who are or the omega males, right? Who are booted out. And they actually come across each other in the wild, and they sometimes form these groups, these little communities of 5 or 6 of them, and they cooperatively hunt, or they just hang out together, and they get affection from each other, and they just keep each other company, right? And we've even removed that from men as something that they're allowed to do, right? You're not allowed to just, and these are males that they get along with other males in the presence of only males, right? That do not get along with other males when there are females present, right? Like this is just the way it is in tournament mating systems and stuff like that. You can have completely unrelated males coming together in the wild and getting along and cooperating in ways that they absolutely would not if you introduced even one female into the group, right? And we've completely eliminated that, and we've sort of cut off a source of gaining a positive identity and gaining human connection from men when we outlawed all of these things. And we said that, there are none, no all-male clubs anymore. There are no all-male anything anymore. And I think that maybe having something like that, and I think that incels and MGTOW and other men are creating those communities in a way online. And that's why I always tread very carefully if I go into the comments section of a MGTOW YouTube video, or if I were to go into an incel community, I would really be hesitant to participate, because I wouldn't want to disrupt the environment as a woman, right? And I think that those men have every right to create those communities and to exclude women if they choose to.
There's another thing about that. I don't think in our society, I don't think we've actually, we've articulated that women are controlling, and we've articulated that women's controlling behavior is condoned in our society. But I mean, if you think about what happens if you go into a household where there's a woman living in that household and you use the bathroom and you leave the seat up and you stay long enough for her to be the next person that goes into the bathroom, there is a temper tantrum, because she doesn't have to be alert and aware enough to look before she sits down. You have to assume that you're going to be doing something to her if you leave the seat up, and you have to put it down so that she doesn't have to look when she sits. How controlling is that? And I never really thought about it until I started having to look every time I went in the bathroom, because I have a habit of putting the lid down when I flush after seeing this horrible video of a slow flush and the water goes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't want that all over my stuff in the bathroom.
My toothbrush. I look.
I look. Other women apparently do not look. And I never really took the time before to look every time. Growing up in my household, the seat was always down, and it was just a natural thing. Guys are taught to put the seat down. Well, if you go into the bathroom and you sit when the lid's down and you let fly, it doesn't go very well. Most women are deeply offended, like you did something to them. If you so much as take a piss and then don't reach down with your hand and put the seat down so that they don't have to look when they go into the bathroom. I mean, that's controlling as fuck. And that's
right.
condoned. That's tolerated.
All right. I will say in my defense that my primary complaint with my guy is that he leaves the cap off the toothpaste. And then every several days I have to take the end of a pair of scissors and dig the plug of hardened toothpaste out of the spout at the neck.
That's just the typical thing. I think that's just typical.
Yeah, I don't think that's gendered.
Just humans learning to live with each other.
I used to get annoyed with it. Now I just sigh and go and get the scissors.
Well, the other end of this is, I saw this post on Reddit a while back questioning why there are not urinals in home bathrooms. And they had to have a choice between, who gets served with what. And a urinal is lost out because they only serve men and boys. Women can't really use urinals. But if you could have both in your bathroom, why not do it? There's nothing wrong. Like putting a urinal in your bathroom wouldn't kill your wife, wouldn't kill your daughters. It would just mean that you have a place to go where you don't have to deal with the seat. And it seems to me that it's sort of a lost thing.
Oh, but
men.
Hannah,
they don't even have, the bathroom is geared around women, and they don't even have the right to not put the seat down.
But Hannah, that's what the sink's for.
Oh, God. Okay.
You can't say that in my household.
All
We're
right.
all allergic to bleach.
I'm just saying because I have an upstairs bathroom that's right outside our bedroom. We have a downstairs bathroom, and for a while there, I had the sink installed, and I did not have the new toilet installed. So there was just like a blank spot with a hole in the floor with a rag stuffed in it, right? That was our toilet. Okay, so all we had was a sink, or you had to go downstairs. So if he got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, he would pee in the sink.
Hence household Clorox. The thing is, with women being that controlling, once again, you have a situation where here we've got, and this goes back to what I said about feminists dictating how men seek female attention too. Here we've got men accepting women telling them how to do things to a degree that a woman can tell you how to go to the bathroom and you'll do it.
Oh yeah, no, and
how the hell are you supposed to navigate between this is what has worked in the past and what seems natural and what feels right when I do it, and this is what this group of authoritative women who call themselves feminists are telling me is going to get me laid? How the
Well,
hell
and
are you
what-
supposed to
something occurred.
navigate that?
what
Something occurred
gets
to me.
Testing
What
with
gets me-
women telling you how to take a piss.
Well, what gets me is how on earth did feminists take a situation where a woman can essentially cut off sex for a week and give a guy the silent treatment, right? Because he left the freaking seat up one too many times, right? And then say that that relationship is essentially the enslavement and subjugation of women.
All right. This is a mystery for the ages. I would like to point out that when you get rid of a positive identity, like a recognition that men have a separate word, not just the gender neutral, then you end up with a service identity, and then you get shit like this, because literally a man is earning his identity by lifting the toilet seat.
Well, and also right around the time that we lost the word wereman, we also began to we also started calling boys by the word that was more commonly
Servant.
used to describe slaves or servants.
It's an interesting art. Linguistic history is very interesting, very unique. I wanted to get to a few more questions. Is there any statistics? This is from Anata K. Are there any statistics on what percentage of men never have sex? I think that the percent, I looked for some percentages, and the best I could come up with was 0.3% by, and that means never. So die a virgin. So it's fairly rare, but I mean, if you're in that percentage, it doesn't feel very rare, I'm sure.
Well, and also I think, you know, you look at it, okay, so a guy didn't die a virgin, he had sex 3 times in his life, you know. Yeah, that's great. Or he had sex once in his life, right? Maybe it was the time he was raped by his teacher.
Speaking of that,
Yeah,
Hillary
somebody else
Rotten
asked about
Cutton,
that.
what if you are involuntarily celibate because you were physically raped by women? Okay, first of all, I hate to ask this, but are you trolling? Not because I don't believe that you weren't raped, but because it is a pun that you've just indicated. Involuntarily celibate. It's a very black pun, but
No, it's possible. Yeah, your celibacy is broken by having been raped, but it isn't. You haven't engaged in sex. You've had it forced on you. And I know at least one guy who cannot sexually engage with a woman because of what a woman did to him. And this can happen. A guy could become incapable of sexually performing with a woman, even though he is straight, because a woman hurt him. And it's not an impossibility. It's not a pun. It's not anything. It's quite possible.
I think actually, you know, when you really think about what sex is, and not just sex, but you know, the aftermath of sex, which usually involves lying asleep in the most, I mean, because when you're having sex, you are, whether you're a man or a woman, you are making yourself as vulnerable as you wouldn't consider going to the grocery store and taking off all your clothes, right? You would feel really vulnerable doing that. If you had to run out of your house because there was a burglar and you were stark naked, you would feel more vulnerable because you were naked running down the street than if you were wearing clothes, even pajamas or something like that, right? So you are getting naked, you are making yourself vulnerable, you're sort of peeling off your outer layer of armor, right? Social armor, and exposing yourself to another person in a highly intimate way. And then you are inviting contact with that other person in the most intimate way possible. This is like a hugely, it requires a lot of trust, actually, or a lot of confidence, right? You either need to trust the other person or you need to be confident in your own ability to ward off any possible bad things that might happen, right? And then after the sex, you know, you typically go to sleep and you are literally lying in a prone state, completely unaware, with another human being who could do anything to you, right? And if you have trust issues, that's not going to be easy. Neither of those things are going to be easy to do, right? So
Yeah. Okay, so Joe the Bulls says, is there a way to cope with being an incel for life? Well, first of all, I would say that probably, unless you're a fortune teller, you won't know if it is for life. So maybe just take it one day at a time. Like, the problem with that question is I don't want to. I don't know how. I have nothing positive really to give as in the way of advice for dealing with a situation like that.
yeah, no, I don't know how one could make it bearable. I guess
Well, focus on
The one thing that I've seen is to stop defining your happiness by whether or not you get women's attention. This is a tough one, simply because our whole society is based around building relationships between men and women that result in partnering up and staying together for life. But there are other possibilities for that. You don't have to pair up with another person. There are people who never do. There are lots of people who never get married, who are single forever. And like this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, or at least don't consciously think about. When you look at the social ladder, right? You look at the very bottom rung of the social ladder that most people think of, right? The absolute bottom rung for women, the women that might be incels, partly because they only want to date up and nobody up wants to look at them. There's 2 more rungs below that with only men and boys. And these are my friends. These are the guys that I would seek out and hang out with, because a lot of them were brilliant, when I was growing up. And it's not all of the guys that I hung out with. I mean, I'm not saying that any guy that used to hang out with me that knows me, I'm putting you on that rung. But I know guys in this situation and have known guys in this situation, and it's hard and it's lonely, but at the same time, each one of them that made peace with it developed a type of freedom. And there are some guys on those bottom 2 rungs who, in developing that sense of freedom and deciding that, you know what, I don't need to have a wife or a girlfriend. I'm not going to try to date anymore. I'm going to focus on this thing I'm passionate about, whether it's a profession or a game or a pursuit outdoors or anything like that. Fixing cars. It could be fixing cars, whatever. That's when a woman or a girl takes interest in them, because she can't get them. And that's not a promise that'll happen every time. But having that ability to not make your happiness dependent on female attention, that is key to surviving that situation. And it's also key, if you can get out of it, to get out of it.
agreed. Okay, Doge put in a question: why do women find incels offensive? Same reason why guppies do. It's a thing called social proof, and it's extremely important in terms of females when they select mates. When they put a guppy they will put a female guppy in a tank that's been separated into 3 separate spaces with clear glass, right? And they see a male that is just all by himself, and they see a male that is in the other end, in the other partition, who's being courted, or he's courting a female, and the female is being responsive, right? And particularly if that female is older than she is, right? when they remove they remove the other female and they remove the partitions, the younger female will always go for the male who's been vetted, the male who, and they did this with peregrine falcons. They had they tried to essentially they paired up peregrine falcons, male and female ones, and the male would make overtures and the female would reject him, and he'd make overtures and the female would reject him. And so they did this until they found a case where the female just consistently rejected this male. And then they took a bunch of stuffed female peregrine falcons and positioned them around this male as if they were all gazing adoringly at him. Okay? And then all of a sudden, the male's not even making any overtures now. All of a sudden, this female who's rejected him consistently is suddenly interested and suddenly trying to initiate courtship rituals, right? So if you're incel, right, if no women will touch you, then no woman wants to touch you, right? And that, I think, is essentially the conundrum that incels find themselves in, and why Hannah's advice really is really good, because whether it actually pulls you out of that situation and women actually start taking interest, or whether they don't, at least you are at a point where you're not placing your entire life's happiness on needing some woman to do that. And when you stop doing that, when you stop acting like you need female approval, as if you already have it or you don't care about it one way or the other, right? That is when, number one, you're going to be focusing on things that fulfill you and things that make you happy. And number two, it really does come across in your confidence and the way that you are, in ways that will actually make women maybe take a second look and say, oh, this is a happy, confident guy, right? As opposed to somebody who's miserable and wanting. So I think that her advice would be, the best advice all around, right? Find some other thing that makes you happy, and just essentially write women off as the measure of your self-worth.
Yeah, I would add to that, and this is half serious. It's something I mentioned in the chat, just like Karen was talking about with the fish. This wouldn't be a way to find a partner that you'd want to stay with, because it'd be a way to find an untrustworthy woman. But one of the biggest aphrodisiacs for some women is a wedding ring. You don't have to be married to put a wedding band on that finger.
Oh yeah, no. And what do guys do on Facebook when they want to attract women? They post tons of pictures of themselves in party atmosphere style settings, with tons of attractive men and women. And usually they post pictures of them smiling and laughing with women that are more attractive than they are, right? And when you do that, you're essentially, you're that male guppy that has that female that's accepting his courtship overtures, right? You are saying essentially, these beautiful women want to hang out with me, and look at how laughing they are, and they look like they're having a good time. And so I mean, it really is kind of, I mean, so much of it is just these kind of subtle signals that you wouldn't necessarily, you would think, oh, well, a woman seeing that would be, she would think, oh, well, I wouldn't have a chance, right? Whereas that's not the way women respond to those kinds of pictures, or the wedding ring. They respond in terms of, oh, this man is obviously desirable, because there are women who want to be around him.
I would add to this, just, I mean, it's your life. You make your decision what you want. I mean, these are all things that, if you want to get a relationship with a woman, you can look at probably pickup artists could probably help you with that. Hurdling the social proof expectations can help you with that. But maybe just realize that it's really, ultimately, it is your choice. There's no, I'm going to be quite blunt. There's no mystery to women. If you actually listen to how pickup artists deal with picking up women, they probably could get you to a point where you could pick up a woman, or you could at least play the odds and pick up a woman. So maybe part of it is realizing or taking back your agency and making a decision, because the shit that you have to go through to get to the point of having a relationship with a woman might just not be worth it to you. And if you pursue Hannah's advice and pursue something that is worth it to you, that you feel is worth your time, you might get to the point where you look at the bullshit that's occurring in the hookup culture, and you're just like, you know what, I'm not interested. And if as Hannah says, a relationship results from that, then it'll probably be a more healthy one. And if it doesn't, then you're enjoying time with the one person that you really have to answer to for at the end of the day, which is yourself. And I don't know if I've added anything that helps. I would say that I think in a lot of ways we, at some point, at least for me, having undergone, this is more personal testimony, having experienced a very severe mental illness, not a mental illness in which I had a distortion in reality or anything. So, detractors shut up about that. But depression and severe panic anxiety disorder, where I would catastrophize to the point where I couldn't leave my house. In order to gain my life, to get my life back, I had to take responsibility for how I thought about my life. And I had to build habits that changed how I thought about my life. And I'm not saying it's exactly the same situation, but it is a situation where I had to learn, I am responsible for the habits that I choose. I'm responsible for my habitual thinking about myself. And if I want to be free from my prison, then I have to change those habits. And if you're interested, the ways that I changed those habits is I actually had to write out new ways of thinking over and over again in order to be able to free myself from my own thoughts. And if that helps, I hope it does. But at the end of the day, I had to make that decision that I was responsible for how my brain worked or how my thoughts were laid out. And I had to do the work, just like you have to do the work with lifting weights to get stronger. Your thought, the way you think about yourself and the way you think about your world is a series of habits that can be changed. And I don't mean to say this in a way to make you feel bad if you are suffering, because holy shit, did I feel bad when I was suffering from my erroneous and negative thinking. And I felt bad about feeling so helpless about it too. I mean, take it at your own pace. And but the most important thing that I learned is that I had to take responsibility for my own mental landscape, and I had to fight for my freedom. And the only person who could give it to me was me. So if you want to think differently about yourself, then that's all I can say. I can only give you my own example of what I did. Anyway, we gotta.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
We've got one more question in the chat. Can you ask what? Can you ask them? I'm guessing they're asking Brian and Hannah on Twitter. Can you ask them what problems they have with pickup artists, if any? I don't really have any problems with pickup artists. I think that some of their analysis may be, overly speculative, or they state it as if it's fact when really it's conjecture, and it's supported by maybe their experience or evidence, but it's not necessarily substantive in terms of, being scientific fact. But I do like the fact that there is a group of men out there who are, they're working on improving themselves. They're working on, because being fit as a human being, in large part, right? So being successful, being confident, being physically fit, being physically attractive, liking what you see when you look in the mirror, all of those things, that's a huge part of what pickup artists tell their I guess their mentees, their little, the people who come to them for advice to do. That's the first thing you do, right? Is hit the gym, learn to like yourself, learn to be confident, stop putting women on a pedestal. When you approach a woman, look at it like there's 1,000 others that you can approach in the next, this evening. And so if she rejects you, it's not the end of the world. View it as a learning experience and an experiment and a way to improve yourself, right? And then move on to the next one and do a little better each time, right? And eventually you'll, and the way they break it down, I think leads to overall to, when it's applied properly, to a building of confidence and sort of building a bit of a thicker skin when it comes to women who reject you. And there will be some women who just reject you just because they can, or just because they're bitches or whatever, who will look at any man who approaches her in a bar and say, as if, right? Because she's not there to pick up men. She's there to lure men so that she can reject them and therefore boost her own social status, right? So essentially, I think that, any approach that actually helps men gain confidence in themselves and helps them, helps encourage them to be fit, to live a healthy lifestyle, to be successful, all of those things. I think that's overall, it's a good thing. So
I wanted to point out, I think that most of the problem that you see people having with the pickup artist community actually comes from that that union strike scab mentality, that the goal being to gain female attention and the bigger goal being to get laid. There's probably a lot of women out there going, that's cheating, you can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. And it's not bad to do that. You're not doing anybody any harm. Where I have a problem, and it's not with pickup artistry, it's not with pickup artists, it's not with any of the advice, it's, that is intended to get guys laid. It isn't with any of the things that Karen just talked about. It's with the very few people that I see in the pickup artist community telling men that this is safer than having a girlfriend. This is a situation where you're exposing yourself to women that you don't know. And in doing that, you could be picking up a woman who's not going to take legal advantage of you, or you could be picking up a woman who is going to go apeshit on you and file false charges and sue you and all kinds of stuff. So that risk is just as much there as it is for any other guy who is trying to date.
Agreed.
It doesn't make you safer. It just makes you more likely to get laid under some circumstances. And this is a thing that you have to... you have to be proactive about.
It makes it more likely that you'll actually...
that you won't see it coming.
Before you're falsely charged with rape, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes it more likely that you don't have a chance to see it coming. I mean, this is kind of hard, because I don't want to tell guys not to do this, and if this is what's working, then it's what's working. But don't let this keep you from watching for red flags and vetting women for character. And if
don't stick your dick in crazy.
If you start getting shit tested, if you start seeing, she's bitching about everything at the bar, her drink wasn't fixed properly, the bartender spilled on her, her dress isn't perfect because of something her friend did, You're looking at somebody that just might be a danger. And it's the same thing as if you're dating a girl and she never can do anything wrong. It's always somebody else's fault, or she doesn't thank you when you open the door for her, or when you do her a big favor. This is important. Don't let the idea that you're never going to see this girl again be your only cushion against malicious prosecution and vexatious litigation, because it's not one. You have to watch for red flags.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know how much what I said actually is helpful, but maybe somebody will get something out of it. Allison says you can change your thoughts with spells.
No, you change your thoughts.
No.
You change your thoughts.
That's not what she said. And you know what? I went through about a pretty shitty, serious depression too. I was 13 years old when I tried suicide. And Allison's right. There's no cure for depression outside yourself. Somebody else is not going to make you better.
What I
You
found
have to do it.
What I found interesting is there really is something to the whole fake it till you make it thing. My grandmother used to tell my mother this when my mom was in a pissy mood, and my mom used to tell me this when I was in a pissy mood. Pretend you're happy for 20 minutes. Fake it till you make it, right? And the really crazy thing is the way our brains process information and turn that into our emotional state actually means that you can fake it until you make it. Like they've actually shown that if you smile, even if you force a fake smile, your mood will elevate after you do that, right? So it's
Well, if that doesn't work, and there are people who will tell you that it hasn't worked for them, the other end of it is find your bootstraps. You've heard of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's a hard one for a lot of people. Your bootstraps aren't necessarily a medicine or therapy or a particular thing. Hell, one of my bootstraps is music. I find the right music. I might not make myself never depressed again, but I can get through a really rough time with the right music. And it's still rough. I'm still depressed. I'm still dealing with shit. But I can bring myself up to a level where I can survive that if I go for the right music. And this is something that everybody's bootstraps might be a different thing. Go outside. It may be your bootstrap. Go find a website full of funny stuff like Damn You Autocorrect, the best of. And that might be your bootstrap. Find somebody that you like to be around and do something with that person. That might be your bootstrap. Spray yourself in your work. That might be your bootstrap. And failing to kill yourself is depressing, says DVID22. Well, not when part of the reason that you fail is you figure out the impact that it's going to have on your family. And I just saying, don't give up on having happiness. Even if you do have the chemical imbalance that causes depression, or you suffer circumstances that aren't going to change, like chronic pain or being alone, and seeing that you don't have a way to not be alone, don't give up on finding a route to happiness. And you can be happy and depressed, because I've done it. Find your bootstraps.
Yeah. Well, like I said,
right.
what I discovered having to fight for my right to, or for my ability to even leave my house, is you have to take responsibility for your thoughts, and you do it on your own terms and in your own time. Don't let anybody tell you when or where or how you take responsibility for your own thoughts. But that's what I discovered. Anyway, we got to wrap this up because we still have an after show. Our after show is going to be discussing a article on the black pill, which is more involuntary celibacy stuff, except it's being shamed by the mainstream, and they're doing their usual song and dance. And this is so if you are interested in joining us in after shows, this one or the future ones, you can go to Patreon and www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio and become a patron. Even $1 a month will get you access to the after shows. Right now, I'm going to work towards switching our Honey Badger Patreon from per episode to monthly, which means I'm asking for those people who are currently a patron to go into their patron pledge area and take the monthly amount that they're pledging to our show and put it in the per episode or the per creation field, and then put the number of episodes to 1. And once enough people have done that I can, I'll still be able to pay Brian because that's sort of critical. I will switch it over to monthly. And I don't know if I've explained that clearly. If I haven't, please ask questions in the comments section below. And Brian, please take us out.